In 2008, a man walked into a government office in Michigan carrying a folder of documents and a head full of questions he had been avoiding for years. He was there for something routine, something that should have been simple. But when the clerk behind the counter asked him to verify his birth records, something did not add up. The documents did not match. The dates were wrong. The signatures looked forged. And then came the question that would unravel everything. Have you ever been reported missing? The man stood there frozen, his mind racing through fragments of memories that had never quite fit together. Memories of a woman who said she was his mother, but whose eyes never held the warmth of maternal love. Memories of a childhood with no photographs, no stories, no roots. Memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. In that moment, standing in that sterile government building, a 21-year-old cold case was about to be solved. A missing child presumed dead by many was about to be found alive, and a family that had spent 2 decades searching would finally get the answer they had prayed for. This is the story of Tyler Evans, a 7-year-old boy who vanished without a trace in 1987, and the impossible truth that emerged when he was found alive 21 years later. The year was 1987. Tyler Evans was 7 years old, living in a small Michigan town where everyone knew everyone and children still played outside until the streetlights came on. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked, where neighbors borrowed sugar without calling first, where the biggest crime in recent memory was someone's mailbox getting knocked over by teenagers with baseball bats. Tyler was a typical kid, curious, energetic. He had a gap-toothed smile that could light up a room. He loved building things with Legos, riding his bike down the quiet streets, spending Saturday mornings watching cartoons while eating cereal straight from the box when his mother was not looking. His parents, David and Linda Evans, were hardworking people who had built a modest but comfortable life. So David worked at the local manufacturing plant, putting in long hours to provide for his family. Linda was a part-time secretary at the elementary school Tyler attended. This meant she could keep an eye on him during the school day and be home when he got off the bus in the afternoon. They had 2 other children. Tyler's older sister Rachel, who was 12 and already rolling her eyes at everything her little brother did, and his younger brother Marcus, who was only 4 and worshipped Tyler like he was the greatest hero in the world. The Evans family lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, a quiet residential area lined with oak trees and white picket fences that seemed straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Their home was filled with the normal chaos of family life. Dishes in the sink, yet toys scattered across the living room floor. The sound of children arguing over whose turn it was to pick what they watched on television. It was beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. And that ordinariness made what was about to happen all the more devastating. Tyler's typical day started early. He would wake up to the smell of his mother making breakfast, usually scrambled eggs and toast. Sometimes pancakes if it was a weekend. He would stumble downstairs in his pajamas, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and sit down at the kitchen table next to Marcus. His younger brother was usually already covered in syrup, despite only being halfway through his meal. After breakfast, Tyler would brush his teeth, get dressed in whatever clothes his mother had laid out the night before, grab his backpack before heading out to catch the school bus. He usually walked to the bus stop with Rachel, though she insisted on walking several paces ahead, so her friends would not think her little brother was cramping her style. Tyler did not mind. He would kick rocks along the sidewalk, look for interesting bugs in the grass, practice his latest magic trick, making a quarter disappear behind his ear that he had been working on perfecting. School was something Tyler tolerated rather than loved. He was a decent student. Not the top of his class, but not struggling either. He liked art class best, where he could draw dinosaurs and spaceships without anyone telling him he was doing it wrong. Math was harder for him. All those numbers that seemed to shift and change when he was not looking. Reading was okay, especially when they got to read stories about adventures and mysteries. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, would later tell police that Tyler was a sweet, well-behaved child who never caused trouble. She would also say, her voice breaking, that she kept expecting him to walk through her classroom door like nothing happened. The neighborhood where Tyler lived was the kind of place where parents felt safe, letting their children roam with minimal supervision. Everyone knew everyone. There was an unspoken agreement that all the adults watched out for all the kids. If Tyler fell off his bike in front of the Henderson house 3 doors down, Mrs. Henderson would come out with bandages and a glass of lemonade. If he and his friends got too rowdy at the park, Mr. Kowalski, who lived across the street, would lean out his window and tell them to keep it down. It was a community that looked after its own. The people who knew Tyler would later describe him in terms that painted a picture of a completely ordinary, completely innocent child. His second-grade teacher called him gentle and kind, always willing to share his crayons. His best friend, a boy named Danny Morrison, who lived 2 houses down, said Tyler was really good at catching frogs and always let Danny have first turn on his new Nintendo. David Evans would later tell investigators that Tyler was just a regular kid. Nothing special. Nothing that would make anyone want to take him. But then he would pause, his voice cracking, and add that Tyler was everything to them. He was their boy. Linda Evans had a harder time talking about Tyler in those early days after he disappeared. When police asked her to describe her son, she would start strong. He was sweet, always giving hugs. He loved to help me in the kitchen. But then, her voice would dissolve into sobs, and she could not continue. Later, after years had passed, and the sharp edges of grief had worn down to a dull, constant ache, she could talk about him more. Tyler had this laugh, she would say, staring at nothing. This giggle that would just bubble up out of him when something struck him as funny. I used to hear it all the time from his bedroom when he was playing, from the backyard when he was with his friends. I have not heard that sound in so long, but I can still remember exactly what it sounded like. Rachel, Tyler's older sister, would struggle with a different kind of pain. She had been at that age where little brothers were annoying, where she was too concerned with her own adolescent dramas to pay much attention to what Tyler was doing. After he vanished, she would be haunted by all the times she had brushed him off, told him to go away, acted embarrassed by him. He would want to show me his drawings or tell me about something that happened at school, she would remember years later. And I would just roll my eyes and tell him I was busy. I would give anything to have him interrupt me now. I would listen to every single story, look at every single drawing. But I cannot. And that is something I have to live with. Marcus was too young when Tyler disappeared to have clear memories of his brother. He would grow up with only fragments, impressions more than actual recollections. The feeling of safety when Tyler was around, the sound of his voice reading bedtime stories, the way Tyler would let him tag along sometimes, even when his friends complained about the baby being there. As Marcus grew older, Tyler would become more legend than memory. A ghost brother he had known but could not quite remember. Mourned, but never really known. The signs of what was coming were so subtle, so easy to dismiss as coincidence or imagination. No one recognized them until it was too late. In the weeks before Tyler disappeared, Linda would later remember he mentioned a few times that someone had been really nice to him. When she asked who, Tyler had been vague. Just someone who talked to him, asked him questions about school, about what he liked to do. Linda, busy with work and managing 3 children and all the chaos of daily life, had assumed it was maybe another parent at school or a teacher. She made a mental note to ask Tyler more about it later. But later never came. David would remember that Tyler had seemed slightly different in those last few weeks. Not dramatically so, just subtly off in a way that was hard to pinpoint. A little quieter than usual, more thoughtful. Once David had found Tyler sitting on the back porch steps at dusk, just staring out at the yard, which was not like him. When David asked if everything was okay, Tyler had nodded and said he was just thinking. About what? Just stuff. And that had been the end of the conversation. Rachel would recall that Tyler had started asking strange questions around that time. Once, while they were watching television, he asked her if someone's parents are not nice to them. Can they get new parents? Rachel, barely paying attention, had said she guessed so if they get adopted or something. Why? But Tyler had just shrugged and gone back to watching the show. And Rachel had not pushed it. Years later, that conversation would haunt her. Had Tyler been trying to tell her something? Had someone been poisoning his mind against their parents? Grooming him? Or preparing him for what was to come? Mrs. Patterson would later tell police that she had not noticed anything particularly unusual about Tyler in the days before he vanished. But, when pressed, she remembered one small thing. Tyler had drawn a picture in art class. He often drew pictures of his family, stick figures holding hands with big smiles, but in this particular drawing, done maybe a week before he disappeared, there was an extra figure. When Mrs. Patterson asked who it was, Tyler said, "Just a friend." The figure was taller than the parents, standing slightly apart from the family group. Mrs. Patterson had thought nothing of it at the time. Children drew all sorts of things, but after Tyler vanished, she searched through her desk for that drawing, wanting to show it to police. She could not find it. It was as if it had never existed. Danny Morrison, Tyler's best friend, would tell investigators something that made them pay attention. A few days before Tyler disappeared, they had been playing in Danny's backyard when a car had pulled up across the street. Nothing unusual about that. People parked on the street all the time. But Danny remembered that Tyler had seen the car, and his expression had changed. "I gotta go," Tyler had said suddenly, even though they had planned to play all afternoon. When Danny asked why, Tyler had just said he forgot he had to do something, and rode his bike home quickly. Danny had watched the car pull away shortly after, but he had not thought to mention it to his parents. Why would he? Kids were always coming and going. It did not mean anything. Except, maybe it did. That is how predators work. They move in the spaces between attention, in the gaps of awareness. They are patient. They plan. They wait for the perfect moment when all the circumstances align. And then they strike. For Tyler Evans, that moment came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in late September 1987. The weather was perfect. That sweet spot between summer heat and autumn chill. Clear blue skies, leaves just starting to turn color. School had let out at 3 o'clock. Same as always. Tyler had gotten on the bus. Same as always. He sat in his usual seat, 4th row on the right side by the window, next to a boy named Kevin, who lived a few blocks away. They talked about normal things, the math homework Mrs. Patterson had assigned, whether the cafeteria would serve pizza or chicken nuggets the next day, and the new Nintendo game Kevin's older brother had gotten. The bus made its normal stops, dropping off children in clusters at various points along its route. Tyler's stop was the 7th one, right at the corner of Maple Street and Oak Avenue. The bus pulled up at 3:47 in the afternoon. The bus driver, A woman named Carol Jensen, who had been driving that route for 12 years, would remember the exact time because she had glanced at the dashboard clock, thinking she was running a few minutes late. Tyler had gotten off the bus, his backpack slung over one shoulder, already unzipped because he had been looking for a pencil on the ride home. Carol had watched him step down. She watched all her kids, making sure they got off safely. She had seen him start walking down Maple Street toward his house, and it was 5 blocks from the bus stop to the Evans home, a 10-minute walk for a 7-year-old. Tyler had made that walk hundreds of times before. Carol Jensen had pulled away from the stop, continuing her route. She had not looked back. She had not seen anything unusual. Later, that moment would replay in her mind 10,000 times. The image of Tyler walking away, his small figure getting smaller in her rearview mirror. She would torture herself with what-ifs. What if she had watched longer? What if she had noticed something? What if she had driven down Maple Street to make sure he got home okay? But in the moment, she had no reason to worry. Tyler was walking home, same as always. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Except it was not. Tyler never made it home that day. He's somewhere between the bus stop on the corner of Maple and Oak and the front door of his house 5 blocks away. He vanished. No one saw it happen. No one heard anything unusual. No one noticed anything wrong until Linda Evans glanced at the kitchen clock at 4:15 and realized Tyler was late. At first, she was not worried. Children lose track of time. Maybe he had stopped to play with Danny for a few minutes. Maybe he had found something interesting on the walk home. A cool bug. A lost baseball. Something that had captured his attention. Linda continued preparing dinner, expecting to hear the front door slam any minute, and Tyler's voice calling out that he was home. But 4:15 became 4:30, and 4:30 became 4:45, and still no Tyler. Linda walked to the front door and looked out, expecting to see him coming down the street. The street was empty except for Mr. Kowalski watering his lawn across the way. She called out to him, "Have you seen Tyler?" Mr. Kowalski shook his head. "Not today, Linda. Is he not usually home by now?" The concern in his voice made something cold settle in Linda's stomach. "He should be," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He got off the bus almost an hour ago." She went back inside and called Danny's house. Mrs. Morrison answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi, Betty. This is Linda Evans. Is Tyler over there?" A pause. "No, I have not seen him today. Is everything all right?" Linda forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I am sure it is fine. He is just running late. If you see him, can you send him home?" "Of course," Betty Morrison said. But Linda could hear the shift in her tone, the note of concern creeping in. By 5 o'clock, Linda's concern had escalated to genuine fear. She called David at the plant. "Tyler is not home," she said, her voice tight. "The bus driver dropped him off over an hour ago, but he never made it here." David's response was immediate. "I am leaving right now. Call the police." But Linda hesitated. Call the police because her son was an hour late? What if Tyler walked through the door right as the police arrived? Would she not look foolish? Paranoid? What if he had just lost track of time and she was overreacting? "Linda." David's voice was firm. "Call them. Now." She did. The dispatcher was calm, professional, asking questions in a measured tone that somehow made everything feel more real, more terrifying. What was Tyler wearing? Blue jeans and a red Transformers t-shirt. What did he look like? Brown hair, brown eyes, about 4 feet tall, maybe 60 pounds. Any identifying marks? A small scar on his left knee from when he fell off his bike last summer. When was the last time someone saw him? The bus driver dropped him off at 3:47. "We will send an officer over," the dispatcher said. "But ma'am, I need you to understand that most missing children cases resolve within a few hours. Kids wander off, lose track of time, try not to panic." But Linda was already panicking. A mother knows, some instinct, some deep primal awareness that goes beyond logic or reason, was screaming at her that something was terribly wrong. Officer Michael Torres was the first policeman on the scene. Arriving at 5:20. He was a 15-year veteran of the small police force, a father himself. He took missing children reports seriously, even though most of them ended with the child being found within a few hours. By 7 o'clock, the search had expanded significantly. More police had arrived. Canine units were on their way. The neighborhood was crawling with people, police, volunteers, neighbors, all looking for any sign of Tyler. They searched every yard, every garage, every shed. They combed through the small patch of woods at the edge of the neighborhood. They checked the park, the playground, the school. They knocked on every door within a 6-block radius, asking the same questions over and over. "Have you seen this boy? Did you notice anything unusual this afternoon? Anything at all?" The answers were all variations of no. No one had seen Tyler after he got off the bus. No one had noticed anything strange. No one had heard any screams or sounds of struggle. It was as if Tyler had simply dissolved into thin air on that 5-block walk between the bus stop and his home. The canine units arrived at 8 o'clock. German shepherds trained to track scents. They were given one of Tyler's shirts from the laundry hamper. The dogs picked up his scent immediately at the bus stop, following it down Maple Street. For the first 3 blocks, the trail was clear. The dogs moved purposefully, noses to the ground, handlers letting them lead. But at the intersection of Maple and Birch Street, 2 blocks from the Evans house, the scent trail ended. Just stopped. And the dogs circled, confused, trying to pick it up again. But it was gone. "What does that mean?" David asked Detective Mills, who had been called in from a neighboring jurisdiction. She hesitated before answering. "It usually means the subject got into a vehicle." The implications of that statement hung in the air like smoke. If Tyler had gotten into a car, it meant this was not a case of a child wandering off. It meant someone had taken him deliberately, intentionally, and they could be anywhere by now. As darkness fell completely, and the search continued with flashlights and floodlights, the reality of the situation began to settle over everyone involved. This was not going to be one of those cases that resolved quickly with a relieved child found playing at a friend's house. This was serious. This was every parent's worst nightmare. Tyler Evans had not wandered off. He had been taken. Linda refused to sleep. She sat in the living room, staring at the front door, as if by sheer force of will, she could make Tyler walk through it. David eventually collapsed on the couch beside her, exhausted but unable to truly rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Tyler's face, heard his voice, remembered moments he had taken for granted, teaching Tyler to ride a bike, playing catch in the backyard, reading bedtime stories. So all those ordinary moments that he had thought would go on forever suddenly felt precious and finite. Morning came with no news. As the sun rose on Friday, September 25th, Tyler had been missing for approximately 14 hours. The search resumed with even more volunteers. News had spread throughout the town and neighboring communities. People took off work to help. The local Kiwanis Club organized a grid search of the surrounding areas. Churches opened their doors, offering space for volunteers to coordinate and rest. The whole town mobilized around one goal: find Tyler Evans. Television news crews arrived by mid-morning, setting up their cameras on the Evans front lawn. Linda and David were asked to do an interview, to make a public appeal. Linda could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to look directly into the camera and say the words that would be broadcast across the state. "Tyler, if you can hear this, we love you. We are looking for you. Please come home. And if anyone has our son, please, I am begging you, bring him back. He is just a little boy. He needs his family. Please." Tips started coming in immediately. The police set up dedicated phone lines to handle the volume of calls. Most were well-meaning, but useless. People who thought they had seen a boy matching Tyler's description at a grocery store, a gas station, a restaurant. Each tip had to be followed up on. Officers dispatched to check, only to find it was not Tyler. False alarms and dead ends. But each one had to be treated as if it might be the one that brought him home. The most promising tip came on Saturday morning. 2 days after Tyler's disappearance, a woman named Margaret Foster called to report that she had been driving on Maple Street around 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon and had seen a light-colored van parked on the side of the road. She could not remember the exact location, but she thought it was somewhere between Oak and Birch, so right in the area where the K-9 units had lost Tyler's scent. Detective Mills interviewed Margaret in person. Could she describe the van? It was white, or maybe cream-colored, kind of old and beat-up looking. "I do not know much about cars, so I cannot tell you the make or model. Did she see anyone near the van?" "No, I do not think so. But I was driving past, so I was not really paying close attention." "Did she notice the license plate?" "No, I am sorry. I wish I had." It was not much, but it was something. Police immediately put out a bulletin asking anyone who owned or had seen a light-colored van in the area to come forward. The van lead generated more tips. Several people reported seeing vans matching that general description, but none of the sightings panned out. Each lead consumed hours of investigative time, only to reach dead ends. 2 weeks after Tyler disappeared, the FBI got involved. Special Agent Robert Chen arrived with a team of federal investigators who had handled child abduction cases before. Agent Chen was honest with Linda and David in a way that was both refreshing and devastating. "I am not going to lie to you," he said during their first meeting. "The statistics are not good. The first few hours after a child is taken are critical, and we are past that window. But that does not mean we are giving up. We are going to pursue every lead, investigate every possibility. We are going to find out what happened to your son." As September turned into October, the investigation continued, but the intensity began to wane. Not because anyone stopped caring, but because there was simply nowhere else to look. Every lead had been pursued. Every tip had been investigated. Every person with even a remote connection to Tyler had been interviewed, re-interviewed, and cleared. Tyler's face still stared out from posters on every street corner, but people had started to walk past them without really seeing them anymore. The story had moved from the front page to the inside sections of newspapers. The television crews had packed up and left. Linda could not accept that the search was scaling down. She organized her own search parties, going out with volunteers every weekend to comb through areas that had already been searched. She called the police daily, asking about new leads, demanding updates. David returned to work because they needed the income and because sitting at home was driving him insane. But his co-workers said he was like a different person. The easy smile was gone. He had lost weight. He moved through his days like an automaton. Rachel threw herself into her schoolwork, using it as an escape from the nightmare her home life had become. Her grades actually improved, but not in a healthy way. She would study until 2 or 3 in the morning, exhausting herself so completely that she would fall asleep without thinking about Tyler. Marcus started having nightmares. He would wake up crying, calling for Tyler, and Linda would rush to his room and hold him until he fell back asleep. By Thanksgiving, 3 months had passed since Tyler disappeared. But the holiday was torture for the Evans family. The empty chair at the table, the knowledge that Tyler loved stuffing and would always sneak extra pieces when he thought no one was looking. Christmas was even worse. Linda had bought Tyler's presents before he disappeared. She always shopped early. They sat wrapped under the tree, a pile of gifts that would never be opened. David wanted to put them away, said it was too painful to look at them every day. But Linda refused. "What if he comes home?" she would say. "What if he comes home and his presents are not here?" The years passed. 1988, 1989, 1990. Tyler's case would occasionally get renewed attention when a slow news day needed filling, or when a similar case somewhere else made reporters remember. There would be anniversary articles. 5 years since Tyler Evans disappeared. Local families still searching for missing son. But the hard truth was that as time went on, the likelihood of finding Tyler alive diminished to almost nothing. By the mid-90s, most people assumed Tyler was dead, even if they did not say it directly to his family. But Linda refused to believe it. She would say, "Until I see proof, until I have a body to bury, my son is alive somewhere." It might have been denial, but it was the denial that kept her going. Linda became active in organizations for parents of missing children. So she attended conferences, joined support groups, lobbied for changes to how law enforcement handled child abduction cases. It gave her life purpose when everything else felt meaningless. David withdrew into himself. He stopped talking about Tyler, not because he had forgotten or stopped caring, but because talking about it hurt too much. His marriage to Linda survived, but it was damaged in ways that might never fully heal. Rachel graduated high school, went to college, built a life. But Tyler's disappearance shaped everything about who she became. She could not form close relationships easily. Trusting people was hard when the world had proven itself to be dangerous and unpredictable. Marcus grew up with Tyler as more myth than memory. His parents spoke about Tyler often, but for Marcus, Tyler was more absence than presence. The brother he had never really known, but whose ghost haunted every family gathering. The turn of the millennium came and went. Tyler, if he were alive, would be 20 years old. An adult. No longer the 7-year-old boy in the school photos that still hung on the Evans walls. Linda kept Tyler's room exactly as it had been, his toys gathering dust, his bed made with the Transformers sheets he had loved. David would sometimes go in there late at night and just sit on the edge of the bed, holding one of Tyler's stuffed animals, letting himself cry in a way he never would in front of anyone else. 20 years passed. Tyler's case was one of thousands of cold cases across the country. The conventional wisdom was that Tyler Evans was dead, had probably been dead within hours of his abduction, and that his body had never been found. And it was a tragedy, but it was over, except for one impossible fact. Tyler Evans was not dead. He was alive. The man who walked into that Michigan government office in 2008 did not know his name was Tyler Evans. He had lived his entire conscious life as someone else, with memories that started around age 8 or 9, vague and fragmentary. He had been told his name was Michael Sullivan, that he had been born in Ohio, that his early childhood had been difficult and traumatic, which was why he was told he could not remember much of it. The woman who raised him who he knew as his mother, was named Patricia Sullivan. She was a quiet, nervous woman who moved them frequently, never staying in one place too long, always seeming to be running from something. Michael, as he had known himself, had always felt something was off about his life. The pieces did not quite fit together. There were no baby photos of him, no relatives who visited, no stories about his birth or infancy. When he would ask Patricia about his early years, she would get agitated, change the subject, or give vague non-answers that only generated more questions. "You were sick a lot," she would say. "It is better not to dwell on the past." He had learned to stop asking, because pushing the issue made her angry. And when Patricia got angry, things got bad. Growing up with Patricia had been complicated. She could be loving and attentive one day, distant and cold the next. She had rules that seemed arbitrary and excessive. He was not allowed to talk to neighbors. He could not join school clubs or sports teams. They never stayed anywhere long enough for him to form real friendships. "We are a team, just you and me," Patricia would tell him. "We do not need anyone else. And other people cannot be trusted." It was a lonely way to grow up. But it was all Michael knew. He accepted it as normal because children accept whatever reality they are given. As Michael got older, the inconsistencies became harder to ignore. In high school, he needed his birth certificate for something, a driver's license maybe, or a part-time job application. And when Patricia finally produced it, the document looked wrong. The paper seemed too new. The seal did not look official. He had asked about it, and Patricia had snapped at him. "What are you implying? That I forged your birth certificate? Why would I do that? You are my son." The fury in her response made him back off, but the doubt remained. When Michael turned 18, Patricia died suddenly. A heart attack, leaving him alone in a world he had never been prepared to navigate. She had left no will, no insurance, no savings, just a rented apartment full of second-hand furniture and a box of papers that raised more questions than they answered. There were multiple IDs with Patricia's photo but different names, bank statements from accounts in various cities, and a newspaper clipping, yellow with age, about a missing child that she had kept for some reason, though the child was not Michael, and the location was not anywhere they had lived. Michael had tried to piece together who Patricia really was, but the trail was cold. The woman he had known as his mother had apparently been living under an assumed identity. But why? And what did it mean for him? Was Sullivan even his real last name? Who was he, really? For years, Michael had drifted through life with these unanswered questions haunting him. He worked odd jobs, moved from place to place, mimicking the transient lifestyle Patricia had modeled. Perhaps because it was all he knew. In early 2008, when Michael was 28 years old, he decided to finally get his life in order. He wanted to go back to school, maybe get some job training, build a real future. But to do that, he needed proper documentation. He needed to prove who he was. And that is what brought him to the government office in Michigan that spring day. The clerk behind the counter was a middle-aged woman named Dorothy Simmons. She had been working in government administration for 15 years. She had processed thousands of identity verification requests and had developed an eye for inconsistencies. When Michael handed over his documents, his birth certificate, his social security card, his expired driver's license, she began the routine process of verification. And immediately, something seemed off. "Mr. Sullivan, when were you born?" Dorothy asked, looking at the birth certificate. "February 12, 1980, Michael answered automatically. It was what he had been told his entire life. Dorothy frowned at her computer screen. "And your social security number was issued in 1988? I am not sure. Maybe. My mother handled all that stuff. Social Security numbers are typically issued shortly after birth, Dorothy said slowly, her frown deepening. Or at least within the first few years of life. But according to our records, this number was not issued until you would have been 8 years old. That is unusual. Dorothy pulled up more records, cross-referencing information across multiple databases. The more she looked, the more inconsistencies she found. The birth certificate listed a hospital in Toledo, Ohio. But that hospital had no record of a Michael Sullivan being born there on that date. Mr. Sullivan, Dorothy said carefully, I am going to need to ask you some questions. She excused herself and went to speak with her supervisor. They talked in low voices, glancing occasionally at Michael, who sat in the waiting area feeling increasingly anxious. After what felt like an eternity, Dorothy returned with her supervisor, a stern-looking man named James Bradford. Mr. Sullivan, Bradford said, we have identified some significant issues with your documentation. Your birth certificate appears to be fraudulent. Your Social Security number, while valid, was issued under circumstances that raise red flags, and your personal history has gaps that we cannot account for. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Mr. Sullivan, is there any possibility that you were adopted through unofficial channels? Or that your mother might have taken you from somewhere else? The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Michael stared at Bradford, his mind reeling. What? No. She was my mother. She raised me. But you have no memories of your early childhood, Bradford pressed gently. No photographs, no relatives, no documentation that holds up to scrutiny. Have you ever wondered if your mother might not have been your biological mother? If she might have taken you from your actual family? Michael felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. The thought had occurred to him in vague, formless ways that he had never let fully crystallize, because the implications were too disturbing. But hearing it stated plainly by this government official made it suddenly, terrifyingly real. A detective from the state police arrived, a young officer named Craig Morrison who specialized in cold cases. He brought with him a laptop and a grim expression. He sat down with Michael and began asking questions, taking notes, comparing answers to information in his database. Do you remember anything about being 7 years old? Morrison asked. No, Michael said. My earliest clear memories are from maybe 8 or 9. Everything before that is just blank. Do you remember a woman named Patricia ever talking about Michigan? Or a town called Riverside? Michael's breath caught. Riverside. The name triggered something. A fragment of a memory so faint it might have been imagination. A street lined with trees. A bus. A red shirt. Maybe. I am not sure. Morrison pulled up a photo on his laptop and turned it toward Michael. Do you recognize this boy? Michael stared at the image. It was a school photo, the kind with the mottled blue background that every child in America had taken at some point. The boy in the photo was missing his 2 front teeth, grinning widely at the camera. He had brown hair, brown eyes, and something about his expression, something in the shape of his face. The way his ears stuck out slightly made Michael's chest tighten. I do not know, Michael whispered. Should I? This is Tyler Evans, Morrison said quietly. He disappeared from Riverside, Michigan in September 1987. He was 7 years old. He was walking home from school and never arrived. There were no witnesses. No evidence, no ransom demand. He just vanished. The case has been cold for 21 years. Michael could not take his eyes off the photo. The boy looked familiar in a way that made his head hurt, like trying to remember a dream after waking. You think that is me? I think it is possible, Morrison said. The timing fits. You cannot remember anything before age 8. Patricia Sullivan has no verifiable history before 1988. And you look remarkably similar to this. He pulled up another image. This one, a computer-generated age progression of what Tyler Evans might look like as an adult. The aged image on the screen could have been Michael's reflection. The same facial structure, the same eyes, the same slightly prominent ears. Michael felt his hands start to shake. There is a way to know for certain, Morrison said. DNA testing. Tyler Evans's parents are still alive, and they have kept their information current in the missing persons database all these years, hoping for exactly this kind of break. If you are willing to provide a DNA sample, we can compare it to theirs. We will know within a few days whether you are their son. Michael agreed to the DNA test. A technician was called in. A simple cheek swab was taken. And suddenly, Michael's entire existence was reduced to cells and genetic markers that would either confirm or destroy the reality he had always known. On the 4th day, Detective Morrison called. Michael's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear Morrison's first words. The DNA results came back, Morrison said, and then paused. In that pause, Michael's entire future hung in the balance. It is a match. Michael, you are Tyler Evans. You are the missing boy from Riverside. You have been found. The words did not feel real. They felt like something from a movie, from a story that happened to other people, not to him. Michael heard himself asking questions. Are you sure? Could there be a mistake? But Morrison was certain. The DNA match was definitive. Michael Sullivan did not exist. He had never existed. He was Tyler Evans, stolen from his family at age 7 and raised under a false identity by a woman who had committed one of the cruelest crimes imaginable. I need to contact your parents, Morrison said gently. David and Linda Evans. They deserve to know their son is alive. But I wanted to tell you first, to give you a moment to process this before everything becomes chaos. Michael sat on his couch, phone pressed to his ear, and tried to comprehend what his life had just become. He had parents, real parents, who had been looking for him for 21 years. He had siblings, a whole family he did not remember, a whole childhood that had been stolen from him, and the woman he had mourned, the woman whose grave he had visited, the woman he believed was his mother, was actually the person who destroyed his life, and theirs. What do I do? Tyler asked, his voice breaking. What happens now? Now, Morrison said, we bring you home. The call to David and Linda Evans happened 2 hours later. Morrison handled it personally. Linda answered the phone. She had been answering calls about Tyler for 21 years. False leads, dead ends, cruel hoaxes. She had learned to guard her heart, to not let hope rise too high, because the crash when it fell was devastating. Mrs. Evans, this is Detective Craig Morrison with Michigan State Police. I am calling about your son, Tyler. Linda's hand tightened on the phone. Have you found him? Is he? She could not finish the question. After 21 years, she was afraid of the answer. Mrs. Evans, you need to sit down, Morrison said. Is your husband there with you? David! Linda called out, her voice sharp with sudden fear. David, come here. It is about Tyler. David came running from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. And he was 62 now, his hair gray, his face lined with years of grief. He took one look at Linda's expression and felt his heart clench. After all this time, news about Tyler could only mean one thing. They had found a body. Linda put the phone on speaker. We are both here. Please, just tell us." Morrison took a breath. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans, I need you to prepare yourselves. Because what I am about to tell you is going to be overwhelming. We found Tyler. He is alive." Silence. Complete. Absolute silence. Linda looked at David. David looked at Linda. Neither of them could process the words they had just heard. "That is not possible," David finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "It has been 21 years. He cannot be—" "He is alive," Morrison repeated. "We have a positive DNA match. The man we have identified is definitely your son. He has been living under a false identity, raised by a woman who we believe abducted him. He had no memory of his early childhood, no idea who he really was. But he is Tyler. He is your son. And he is alive." Linda made a sound that was part sob, part gasp. Her legs gave out and she collapsed into a chair. David stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. 21 years. 21 years of grief, of hopelessness, of living with a wound that never healed. And now this stranger on the phone was telling them it was over. Their son was alive. The reunion was arranged for 2 days later, giving everyone time to prepare. Though how do you prepare for something like this? The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private room at a counseling center in Riverside. Therapists would be present. Detective Morrison would be there. Everything would be documented and handled with professional care. But no amount of professional preparation could ready anyone for the emotional tsunami that was about to hit. Linda and David arrived an hour early. They could not help themselves. Linda had barely slept in 2 days. She had stood in Tyler's preserved bedroom, looking at his toys and his bed and his little shoes, crying until she had no tears left. When Tyler arrived with Detective Morrison, Linda saw him through the window, and her knees buckled. David caught her, holding her up, his own eyes locked on the young man walking toward the building. He was tall, taller than David. He had Linda's eyes and David's ears and his own uncertain, anxious expression that was entirely his own. He looked nothing like the 7-year-old in their memories, and exactly like that 7-year-old all at once. The moment Tyler walked into the room and saw Linda and David, something shifted in his expression. He stopped, staring at them, and for a moment, no one moved. "Tyler," Linda whispered, and the sound of his real name coming from her lips did something to him. His eyes filled with tears, though he did not fully understand why. "I do not remember you," Tyler said, and it came out like an apology. "I am sorry. I know you are my parents, but I do not remember." "It does not matter," Linda said, taking a tentative step toward him. You are here. You are alive. That is all that matters." She closed the distance between them and pulled him into a hug. Tyler stood rigid at first, uncomfortable with this stranger's embrace. But then something broke in him. He started crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he did not know existed. David joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and they stood there, crying together. A family reunited after 21 years of forced separation. Detective Morrison and the FBI agents now assigned to the case worked to piece together what had happened. Patricia Sullivan's real name was Patricia Morgan. She had a history of mental illness, multiple hospitalizations, and had lost custody of her own child years before Tyler's abduction. Records suggested she had become fixated on having a child again, had been seen in Riverside in the weeks before Tyler disappeared, watching children at playgrounds and near schools. The theory was that Patricia had targeted Tyler specifically. A boy of the right age, from a family she had observed, walking alone on a predictable route. She had likely approached him in a vehicle, possibly posing as someone who knew his family, or claiming there was an emergency. Tyler, a trusting 7-year-old, had gotten in the car, and just like that, his life had been stolen. Why had Patricia not been caught? She had been smart and paranoid. She had moved constantly, used false names, avoided creating records. She had kept Tyler isolated, homeschooling him in later years or enrolling him in schools with forged documents that did not hold up to close scrutiny but were good enough for overwhelmed administrators. She had stolen Tyler's childhood and replaced it with a fiction, all to fill the void in her own broken psyche. But Patricia was dead now, beyond the reach of justice. She died never being held accountable for her crimes. This fact burned in Linda's heart. "She stole our son," Linda said in one interview with police. "She stole 21 years of his life, 21 years of our lives together, and she is dead. She does not have to answer for what she did." The adjustment period was difficult for everyone. Tyler moved back to Riverside, getting an apartment near his parents while maintaining his independence. He was not 7 anymore. He could not just slot back into family life as if nothing had happened. He was an adult with his own life, his own personality shaped by experiences his biological family had no part of. There were awkward family dinners where conversation would stall, holidays where Tyler felt like an outsider, looking in at family traditions he did not share, moments when Linda would slip and call him Michael, or when Tyler would forget and not respond to Tyler because that name still felt foreign. Rachel tried to build a relationship with her brother, but it was hard. They were strangers with shared DNA, but no shared history, and the brother she had mourned was frozen at age 7 in her mind. This adult man was someone else entirely. Tyler struggled with his identity in profound ways. Legally, he was Tyler Evans again. Michael Sullivan had been erased from official records, revealed as the fiction he had always been. But Tyler still felt like Michael in many ways. That was who he had been for 20 of his 28 years of life. You cannot just flip a switch and become someone else. He entered intensive therapy. Working through the trauma of discovering his entire childhood had been built on lies and kidnapping. He grappled with complicated feelings about Patricia, anger at what she had done, but also grief for the only parent he had really known. There were good moments too, times when something would trigger a fragment of memory for Tyler. The smell of Linda's perfume, the sound of David's laugh, the taste of a particular food. Small moments of recognition that felt like gifts. Times when the family would be together and something would click. When it would feel natural and right rather than forced and awkward. 3 years after Tyler was found, the family gathered for Thanksgiving. It was not perfect. Tyler still felt disconnected sometimes, still struggled with feeling like he truly belonged. But when Linda said grace before the meal and thanked God for bringing her son home, Tyler did not flinch at being called her son. Progress, small and hard-won, but progress nonetheless. The story of Tyler Evans raised uncomfortable questions that lingered long after the media moved on to other stories. How does a child vanish in broad daylight with no witnesses? How does a kidnapper keep a stolen child hidden for over 2 decades? What systemic failures allowed Patricia Sullivan to move through society unchecked with a kidnapped child? There were no satisfying answers, just the uncomfortable reality that children are vulnerable and the systems meant to protect them are imperfect. Tyler's case reminds us that truth can be stranger than fiction, that miracles do occasionally happen, but that happy endings are more complicated in real life than in stories. Tyler Evans was found alive after 21 years, which is extraordinary. But the childhood stolen from him can never be returned, and the years his family spent grieving can never be reclaimed. Justice was never served because the perpetrator died before she could be held accountable. Tyler Evans today continues building his life, piece by piece. He is forging relationships with his biological family while honoring the complicated reality of his past. He is an advocate now for missing children organizations, using his unique perspective to help others. His story did not end with a perfect bow, but it ended with him alive, with possibilities ahead rather than only tragedy behind. The case file on Tyler Evans has been marked solved, located alive. But some cases, even when solved, never truly close. The questions remain. The pain lingers. The lost time can never be recovered. Tyler Evans was found. But what was taken from him, and from his family, can never fully be restored. That is the real tragedy here. Not that he was lost, but that even in being found, something irreplaceable remained forever missing.